Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session of Rome, Where Are We? I believe that this is Lecture 4, Reading 3, Marius and Sulla. I've noticed a phenomenon that when I am immersing myself in the ancient texts for these readings, and then I'll go take a walk, finish the reading, get a cup of tea, whatever, as is my wont, I'll listen to current events podcast, and the sense of historical vertigo is interesting. I'd be curious to discuss with any of you if you've also felt that, to hear about what Marius and Sulla, and then in this reading, the first glimpse of Pompey and Crassus, and then to hear what we're going through today, with what other people are saying, how that ends up reflecting. Something that doesn't get focused much on this is how religious Sulla was. And some people might say, and in fact, Plutarch does say, that he was using it to manipulate people. And well, Sulla used a lot of things to manipulate a lot of people. But that doesn't mean that he didn't believe. By the Spenglerian perspective, Rome was in the midst of second religiousness and was expressing itself in different ways. I don't think the second religiousness was as intense during last session's time talking about the Gracchi. It was very circumspect, very polite, very observant, filial piety, the old gods and all that. There's something else happening here. And perhaps this is fatuous, but I was listening, as I do sometimes, to Tomorrow Never Knows, and the lyrics hit me in a different way after this, that not the famous opening lyrics. It's a little bit hard to hear what John Lennon is saying in that. So a bit further on in that song, that, there's the famous opening. Highly recommend listening to it. I hope everyone's heard it, and if they haven't, go look for it. I'd put it in here if it weren't for copyright strikes. So that you may see the meaning of within. It is being that love is all and love is everyone. It is knowing that ignorance and hate may mourn the dead. It is believing. But listen to the color of your dreams. It is not living. Or play the game existence to the end of the beginning of the beginning. That's there's a certain kind of numinous feeling to that. We'll come across dreams that literally changed history in this reading today, or I suppose the dreams that men had whose actions changed history. Marius and Sulla. Right away in the beginning of this, there's that image. I've walked along the Appian Way, going when I was in Rome, when I was living in Italy, and I decided one day, I thought it would be a very good idea I just felt like I wanted to walk up the Appian Way, through the Theodosian walls into the city, as some of the triumphal routes would do. The triumphal rites coming from the south. Triumphal rites from the north came through Piazza del Popolo, the place where the big obelisk, one of the big obelisks are today. The Appian Way has a less grand entrance to the city these days. It goes through that arch, the picture of which you saw. It's called the Arch of Claudius. Drusus, the Arch of Drusus, presumably named after Emperor Claudius's father, who conquered a bunch of Germans, had a triumphal arch, they say. I say this makes no sense. An army, typically the triumphal arch is for the returning army to process through or to memorialize where they processed. That arch is in the wrong place. So it's on the south edge of the city. It makes less sense for that arch to be from a northern campaign against the Germans. It makes a lot more sense for it to be from an army returning from the south, perhaps returning from Ostia, returning with Jugurtha in chains. It is my, not hypothesis, but my speculation, that that image that you saw, stripped of its marbles, built inside the Theodosian wall at one point, and having an aqueduct unceremoniously put over it, was quite possibly the disgraced arch of Gaius Marius. Plutarch starts off by saying that just like Harry S. Truman, who added that S himself, Gaius Marius had no middle name. So this is saying, we've discussed this before, this is to say that he did not have any extra family honorifics. He came from a very straightforward, simple background. The place that he came from is the same place as Cicero, Arpinum. That's a city, when you're on the train, when you're on the high-speed rail between Naples and Rome, that thing just, it's like it was shouting at me to pay attention to this thing up on the bluff that you see. It's a big, broad plain. When you're growing up there, both Gaius Marius and Cicero grew up in a place where it's like a hilltop fortress. It's perched up there like the Potala in Tibet, except it's a village up there on a cliff. And you can see the coastal plain of Italy out before you, facing to the sea on the west side of Italy, and from where that is, you can still see the plumes. You can't see Vesuvius, but you can still see the plumes from Vesuvius, and you're about a little bit closer to Rome than halfway between Neapolis and Rome. And I imagine that knowing that the big city was there, and you're from a small place, those are two men, that it's not an accident that two notable men, and possibly more, came from there. You're growing up in a place where you're looking, you can see everyone who comes to you, everyone who goes. It's got to impact the brain somehow. Plutarch notes that there were, it was a rude place, compared with city delicacies, rude and unrefined, yet temperate, comfortable to the ancient Roman severity. So this is a very puritanical place. One of the things that we should remember, that he's being too delicate to go into, this place had no sewers. It would have had no sewers, they just would have had outhouses. Rome, you could have gone to the bathroom in a place with flowing water. Not where Gaius Marius grew up. So he started his, we remember old Scipio Africanus. Well, Gaius Marius, just like Tiberius Gracchus served with Scipio Africanus, so did Gaius Marius. Gaius Marius is a little bit younger than Scipio Africanus, but he is, he's way younger than Scipio Africanus. He's a bit younger than Tiberius Gracchus, but he is still old enough to have served with Scipio. He didn't serve with him in the Punic War. He served with him later on at Numantia. So this is a very important thing about the analogies. So we're going to be talking a lot about the analogies. I'm going to work up a timeline that we're going to discuss, and we're during our session on Saturday. We got to think about the commonalities. We also have to think about divergences. One of the things that comes to mind. Where is Rome's Vietnam? Whatever we decide about that, we have to realize that one point of divergence that has happened already. The United States obviously lost Vietnam. Rome has to have won its Vietnam. There is no military engagement along our analogical timeline that is equivalent to a defeat in Vietnam. I believe, however, that the closest thing to Vietnam itself is the Numantine Wars, the fight against Jugurtha. Across the ocean, in Africa, in an exotic place, there is this upstart. You take down your big enemies, and after this big war, there's this upstart local ruler who's very friendly with all the Western people. Ho Chi Minh wanted to shake hands with Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was too racist to even talk to him. Think of what that could have solved. But that was during the Treaty of Vienna. That was in 1919 in Paris that happened. So I believe, not to dwell on it too much because we got a lot to cover today. We could go on. This one bit of reading, this could be its own 3 or 4 sessions. The wars with Jugurtha was Rome's Vietnam. Rome won its Vietnam, even if it wasn't the right analogy there. And so in that sense, the United States losing Vietnam may well be something that clicks us closer to the preserving of a federal democracy instead of going into a global empire. Imagine how unrestrained the United States would be had there been a victory in Vietnam. Imagine how ambitious the generals, how overconfident the generals would have been, and the young people in Vietnam would have been. Gaius Marius, then, is analogous to someone who would have served and risen through the ranks in a victorious Vietnam situation. Kind of working through like a Nixon dirty trick backstabbing type thing. He is part of, one thinks of the JFK best and brightest type attitude with the way it's described. So, talking about how he served with Scipio, he had several honors conferred upon him, and at once, when at an entertainment, a play, a question arose about comrades in one of the company, whether really desirous to know or only in complaisance, asked Scipio, where shall the Romans, after Scipio, should obtain another general? Scipio, gently clapping Marius on the shoulder, sat next to him and said, here perhaps. So promising was his early youth of future greatness. So, imagine the McNamara War Cabinet bringing up perhaps a young Dick Cheney and saying, why? Mr. Not assassinated JFK? Right, Dick Cheney. Or perhaps during the Nixon administration, Kissinger or something says, well, this guy. Hooray, we won. We're enjoying an entertainment. That's, so you can see the commonalities, yet also the divergence. Right away, Marius starts playing dirty tricks. He did not behave like a young man, newly and undeservedly advanced. Newly and undeservedly advanced. In authority, he assumed all the courage that his future actions would have warranted. He threatened these people who were opposing him to electing office. Remember, he's the first novus homo, the first new man that we've encountered. He's not coming from a noble background. Sulla does come from a noble background. Marius does not. So he's accused of bribery in his elections. He becomes tribune. It's not enough for him. He wants to also become consul. So this is the first time that you have someone who's rising up through the ranks, who's being consul. You're not supposed to be consul when you're coming from not the sen. If your dad's not a senator, you're not the fortunate son. You should not be allowed to be consul. There was no law against it, but it hadn't been happening. Marius basically bribes and bullies and pushes his way into it. So then on Scipio with his purple prose on page 5 of 48, conveying this might be true, and again it conveys something that is true about what kind of person he was, and additionally makes a metaphorical point about his relationship to Rome. It's very good literature by Plutarch here. Marius is praised for both temperance and endurance, of which latter he gave a decided instance in an operation of surgery, for having, as it seems, both his legs full of great tumors, and disliking the deformity, he determined to put himself into the hands of an operator, surgeon. And when, without being tied, they didn't tie him down, they didn't strap him down, stretched out one of his legs, and silently, without changing countenance, without any difference of expression in his face, he endured the most excessive torments, never flinching or complaining. And when the surgeon went to the other leg, he declined to have it done, saying, I see the cure is not worth the pain. So as with his legs, Marius was to Rome. It begs the question. Was Marius's cure worth the pain the Republic endured? It's an open question. So he's friends with Caecilius Metellus. This is the August Metelli family, who would have a wayward daughter, Claudia Metella, who brings up lots of trouble later on. And he basically screws this guy over. He takes him on as his patron and then stabs him in the back, metaphorically. So here we have, and this is interesting, when others were comforting Metellus, who took the heavy loss of his friend, he basically trapped Metellus to put this, politically trapped him to sentence a friend of his to death, to give them the death penalty. And friends were comforting him for this. Marius boasted in all company that he had involved Metellus in the guilt of putting his friend to death. Like, this is a far cry from Scipio Africanus and the Gracchi, isn't it? This is full on already, whether he was a sociopath or not. This is sociopathic behavior. He was like, hey, yeah, he's joking and bragging about this guy who was his friend, this guy who was supposed to be his mentor, who definitely was his benefactor, and bragging, oh yeah, I forced him to put his friend to death. This is a new level, right? By the way, this is another thing. It unsettles me. We're seeing this is another current events thing. The most unsettling thing, if you had to guess what recent statement from a politician made me more unsettled than anything in a long time, I bet it would be pretty tough to guess because it was a weird moment. John Boehner. It's pronounced Boehner. John Boehner was getting emotional, which he does, and that's fine, but he was honoring Nancy Pelosi. It really didn't make that much sense, but he was put up to saying something. His children, who are on the left of things, opposite to him, apparently encouraged him to say this, and he said regarding Nancy Pelosi, game recognizes game. As the young people say, that reminded me of Gaius Marius. Now, he's not meaning that sincerely, but this is the beginning. We got to realize, ladies and gentlemen, the politicians of the United States, egged on by their children, are beginning to brag of behaving like hustlers. They're beginning to to boast of acting like they're living in a hip-hop video. Or I don't know, something, whatever you want. But it's the parallels are there, and they're not encouraging. This is one of those kinds of readings. And here we are. This is the first instance right after this. The augur told him that heaven promised him some incredible good fortune. And it doesn't come up in the Plutarch, but there was the great prophecy of an eagle's nest, the eagle having multiple eggs, and that these eggs meant that he took it to mean that each egg in the eagle's nest meant that he would have successive consulships, which you weren't supposed to do. But he did it. He had many consulships in a row, breaking the traditions, violating the sacred norms of our democracy. Very much along those lines. And now, so there's something else. There's crisis after crisis after crisis in this. Rome is extremely wealthy, but Rome is also getting slammed by chaotic geopolitics. So just after they defeat this guy, there's the Jugurtha's page 7. Jugurtha's apprehension was only just known when the news of the invasion of the Teutones and the Cimbri began. Here we have the Germans, or ancestors of the Germans. No one is really quite sure, because the Romans didn't quite pay attention to them, that he talks about, Plutarch speculates that they are from, actually, Lake Maeotis. Interestingly enough, Lake Maeotis is now a swamp. You know where it is? It's in the Sea of Azov. It's in the Crimea, pretty much. So they're Celto-Scythians. Others say that they're Cimmerians, the Cimmeri. I get my screen to wake up. Sorry about that. So, and then this also echoes something that is in elsewhere mentioned in Tacitus, that the Germans are so different from the Romans. They're taller, they're intimidating. They thought the Italians thought that these guys were weird looking because they had very pale, kind of like platinum blonde hair, which they thought was weird. They thought that their children, I think that this is in Tacitus, Carlin mentions this as well, because they thought the children looked like old people because they had white hair. So there's still people like that in Northern Europe, but the Italians hadn't seen it. They had someone with normal yellow blonde hair, and so this makes a big deal in the battles, especially when you get to the naked tobogganing. That's that in here. There's so many amazing anecdotes in this that we're not going to be able to get to. Gosh, I'm already 20 minutes in. This is going long, ladies and gentlemen. All right. I got to worry about file sizes. So, Marius's Mules. This is another thing. This is a commonality with us in the United States, is that on page 9, you see what he does. He reforms. Plutarch does not dwell on it, but Marius needed to raise the army quickly. This is the start of the all-volunteer force. So, the United States ends its draft, has the all-volunteer army. Rome, this is a similar dividing point. So this is like something, I don't know, maybe in the 1980s, whatever. But this is something where they're fighting geopolitical foes with an all-volunteer force, and that is something new. Some people say that they called it Marius's Mules because everybody carried their own baggage. On another hand, someone thought that it was called Marius's Mules because of a point when there was Scipio had to inspect his officers' horses, and Marius had his horse that was treated very, very well, and also a mule. He also had a mule with him. And so he was treating the animals well. That for both the animals and the people who served him, who were useful to him, he'd support them. He'd feed them. He'd eat the food that they ate. He slept in the bed that they slept in. So this guy, I mean, you can say what you want about this guy's ethics, about this guy's decisions, but there was no BS with Gaius. There's a lot of talk about the war, about the Ambrones, a lot of wonderful tactical detail. And then just a bit of that. I love this quote on the top of page 13, saying that he chose a place for his camp in considerable strength where there was a scarcity of water, and the soldiers were wondering as they were going to start fighting the Germans, hey, how are we getting our water? He gestures past where the enemy was. The enemy was in the way of the water. And he said, and think of instrumentality and how he's using people as means to an end. So he puts them where they need to kill in order to drink. They need to kill in order to live. And Marius points out and says about water, there, said he, you may have drink if you will buy it with your blood. It worked. The trick worked. They were motivated. They won the battle. And another bit of purple prose from Sulla about how, this is in southern France, this is near Marseille, and Massalia, the Greek town, and apparently he dug a trench through the alluvial swamps so that you could have large ships come into port at Marseille. Probably the same path is used today. It gets continually dredged. Marius was apparently the first person who did that to get logistics. As they say, amateurs study tactics, professionals study logistics. Marius was a genius at logistics, and this is what helped him defeat these migrating Celts and Germans. But in what is now southern France, it is saying that the inhabitants of Massalia made fences around. So great was the slaughter. the inhabitants of Massalia made fences round their vineyards with the bones, and that the ground enriched by the moisture of the putrefied bodies, soaked with the rain of the following winter, yielded at that season a prodigious crop. And if that sounds over the top, realize that very recently you could go to Ukraine and see the old bone piles and pyramids of skulls and bones from the Ostfront. And this thing is real. Another metaphor that's important, that saying that there always happened, he was always thinking about signs, that there were storms, there were rainstorms after battles, that people noticed this pattern, and he thought maybe it was from all the heat, from all the moisture. Possible. But then talking about how the thickness of the air, the blood and corruption that thicken the air, which naturally is subject to alteration from the smallest causes. That caught my mind, because this is something that almost anticipates what you could call the butterfly effect. The idea that small little moments in a powerful and individual person's life can have vast impacts for people, for nations, for empires. So we need to move along. We're going to definitely talk a lot about this in the session. He obtained his 6th consulship by distributing vast sums of money among the tribes. Again, he's bribing. The elections are now spectacles involving games, celebrations. People are paying for the votes, and people are coming to expect it. So the institutions of the Republic cannot hold under such a situation. And we're seeing that. People are fighting as to which way that's going to go on that in the United States right now. And they're arguing about it. Even arguing over who's serious and who isn't serious. He gets caught up in the social war. He is fighting against the uprising of the Allies, the Italian allies. This was civil war within Italy, breaking out into open hostilities, one part of Italy fighting another. And at the same time that this is happening, just again, crisis on crisis on crisis, just as that is wrapping up, Mithridates in the east, I think he's a very Putin-like figure, sees, Rome is weak, now's my chance. And he gets a conspiracy set up in all the Roman cities in the east that on a given day, confederates working for him, conspirators working for him, will assassinate any Roman official and magistrates and their families in these cities simultaneously. And then he goes in with his Eastern Greek armies and sets up tyrants. And then in Rome, this is like something out of Antigone. I don't think that Plutarch could have written this without thinking about Antigone, where because of the corruption of the leadership, because of Creon not following the law correctly, the city gets a plague. And that's, you could say that's superstitious, but at the same time, maybe there's something to this, that if there is mental illness, if there is physical illness, do you hold the leadership of a country responsible? Yes. Even we would say yes. But what he says, the condition of the city, which had long been unsound and diseased, became hopeless now that Marius found so opportune an instrument for the public destruction as Sulpicius's insolence. This man professed in all other respects to admire and imitate Saturninus, and only he found fault with him for backwardness and want of spirit in his designs. So these are the co-conspirators. These are the slime balls that Marius rides to power. Saturninus was his earlier populare agitator, and now this guy Sulpicius is even worse, even more craven and grasping at power. So eventually, really have to cut the long story short, the social war is happening in the east. Sulla returns from the east after this whole thing with Sulpicius is that they order they order Sulla to stop fighting the war in the East, and this war in the East goes on for a long time. It's not a decisive victory against Mithridates. It's a repeated thing. They don't deal with it right away. He comes back. There's a dirty trick played on Sulla. Sulla comes back. Sulla had left, I believe, 2 legions of his in Nola, which is dealing with the Oscan, the ornery Oscan rebels in the hills up above Naples. He comes back there, and he has that army ready for him, so he can move quickly, comes back there, comes into Rome. And we see then everything that happens with all of that. Gaius Marius then, with his last hurrah, he's old, he's fat, he's probably crazy, he probably has dementia. Gaius Marius is then washed out of the city, goes to North Africa. They try to kill him, but so august was he that, and this comes, I believe this might be in Livy, it's not in the Plutarch, where the Plutarch breaks off right before this point, but apparently a hired Gaul mercenary. We would have to imagine a guy looking kind of like a Viking, a real tough guy, said, Gaius Marius is in there, go kill him. He comes back out, crying and saying, oh, no, I cannot. No, there were sparks coming out of his eyes, saying that he could not kill the great Gaius Marius. Sulla, to cut his biography short, Sulla was from a well-to-do senatorial family where his dad got kicked out of the Senate because of corruption. They lost a bunch of the money. Maybe he was blamed unfairly, maybe not. He grows up wanting to be an actor. He wants to be an artist, doesn't really do it. He ends up, through his great fortune, Sulla Felix, Sulla the happy, Sulla the fortunate. He ends up falling in love with an older woman, a wealthy older woman who loves him, an old prostitute. When she dies, he was her favorite. She gives him lots and lots of money. With this, he starts his political career. He's that kind of guy. He was very charming. People thought that he was great to be around. In his youth, very much of a party guy. So, he rises the cursus honorum, which he would later formalize, the stepping stones of political power, losing elections, winning elections. Then during the Numantine War, he actually gets the enemy of Rome. He's the one who captures Jugurtha. It is the generalship of Marius that wins the war. It is the cunning of the political machination and cunning of Sulla that gets to use tribal family politics to actually capture Jugurtha. But he's not quiet about it. He creates a ring with a seal, with a picture of him delivering Jugurtha to Gaius Marius in chains. This really annoyed Gaius Marius, and it was part of the split and the feud between them. So, and this is very important. Here's the religiousness part. There are all these signs. It is thick. The story is thick with signs. While Sulla departed for camp to order the rest of his affairs there, he sat brooding at home and at last hatched that execrable sedition which wrought Rome more mischief than all her enemies together had done, as was indeed foreshown by the gods. For a flame broke forth of its own accord from under the staves of the ensigns, and was with difficulty extinguished. 3 ravens brought their young into an open road and ate them, carrying relics into the nest again. Mice, having gnawed the consecrated gold in one of the temples, the keepers caught one of them, a female, in a trap. She, bringing forth 5 young ones, and in the very trap devoured 3 of them. Greatest of all, in a calm and clear sky, there was heard the sound of a trumpet, with such a loud and dismal blast as struck terror and amazement into the hearts of people. The Etruscan sages, these are the old people who spoke a language that was not Latin, like the old creepy. It would be like, for us, it would be like druids. Like now we think of like old mystical people. The Etruscan sages affirmed that this prodigy betokened the mutation of the age and a general revolution in the world. Now, what does this sound like? There's a trumpet. in the sky. There's fire erupting from the earth. The animals from the earth perform abominations. There's mother figures doing horrible things. The end of the age heralded by the sound of a trumpet and fire. This is the ekperosis, the destruction of the world. This is the signs of fire at the end of an age. This is like the book of Revelation, which was roughly written kind of about the same time as Plutarch was writing this. But people had this kind of feeling, and then he talks about it betokened the mutation of the age. According to them, to the Etruscans, there are 8 ages differing from one another in the lives of the characters of men. To each of these, God has allotted a certain measure of time determined by the circuit of the great year. Anyone watching that Graham Hancock show, maybe you know what they're talking about there. Maybe that rings a bell. This is the precession of the equinoxes. Right about this time, they were exiting the era, believe what you want about astrology, one way or the other. These people back then noticed that the equinoxes were precessing and leaving the age of Aries and entering the age of Pisces. It was at this time that a new age was dawning, as people are now noticing that a new age is starting to dawn as we are starting to enter into Aquarius and out of Pisces, for whatever that is worth. So he takes 6 complete legions. There were 6 legions that marched on Rome. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that just for that, and that we need to realize the stomach churning, sick aspect of that. That this was the first time ever that Rome, a sacred city with sacred walls, Rome, the city whose founder murdered his brother because his brother didn't respect the laws of the walls, Rome, that they even then called the Eternal City, a general whose soldiers had their standards said SPQR in the name of the Senate and people of Rome with 6 legions, marches on his own city. And Plutarch says that he sent fire darts to the tops of the buildings so that the fire would spread more and spread faster. It is utterly from sources elsewhere. Sulla wasn't like this before the social wars, and it was remarked that his nature shifted. He was never ruthless and never cruel until he fought those battles of, and he'd fought other battles, but until he fought the battles of Roman against Roman. There was a specific trauma in that unleashed a dark, sick fury in this man. And that's the kind of thing that civil war does. I don't think it should be carried lightly. It shouldn't be made histrionic to say that you're in a civil war when you're not. There's a difference between civil war and civil unrest. I'd really have to watch the time. There's a very interesting, on page 34, mark this mentally or on your paper or on your digital PDF, that we need to talk about Mithridates with the Deus Ex Machina, and then when Mithridates meets Sulla, I think it's very much like Putin. So many moments I can't go over. I have to remark on there was overwhelming force of arms, at least it's painted this way. It's painted that there was overwhelming force of arms with the Eastern generals, but they were so overconfident that the Romans overcame them, that they had their... Mithridates' general coming down from Thrace, this is page 37, had an army of 100,000 with 10,000 horse and 90 chariots armed with scythes at the wheels. That's what Dan Carlin likes to call the human lawnmower. On the sides of the chariots, You had, I'll pick up a match again. So on the sides of the chariots, you had little spinning blades, which would go around, probably curved. And so that they would have the battle formation. The front of the battle formation is here. They would come at it, charging with the chariots. The horses turn and run into the shield wall with sharpened, spinning steel blades going at whatever RPM of a chariot wheel going 25, 30 miles an hour, because it's galloping horses. When that's happening, they go past everybody and consider that that's how they win a war. But that's not what happened here with the defeat of Mithridates. In fact, the way that it's portrayed literarily, it is almost as if he's talking about an inversion of the Battle of Marathon. Now think back to the Battle of Marathon. What happens there? You have the Greek phalanx. You have the Persians getting off their ships, trying to set up a shield wall. The Persian cavalry isn't there for whatever reason. The Greeks seize the moment. The Greeks run for between half a mile and a mile in their armor, running at a slight downhill because they're going to the sea. They crash into the Persian line. They win the war for all of Greece, supposedly. Here, a few hundred years later, what are the Greeks doing? They're not charging. The Romans are the ones who are charging. The Romans in cohorts, in manipole, or not manipoles at this time, but in cohorts, in the smaller flexible formation. They throw down their spears, they said, they pull their swords, and without spears, charge into the Greeks, who have put their slaves in front of them, which angers the Romans, really makes the Romans angry that you put the slaves, that's not leadership. And so they win, they crashed into the line. And the Greeks who had the gear, who had the numbers, but surrendered the initiative, were defeated by Sulla's forces. And again, with this sense of the religious, there were these two emissaries of Sulla who come back from the cave of Trophonius. This is northwest of Athens. There's a cave where, like, you go, maybe it was a sulfur cave, maybe you drank kykeon before you went in it, whatever. They go into this cave to, like, hallucinate and like go on a vision quest, man. Imagine this. Generals in the army doing vision quest stuff. They go into the cave and come out. And then they come back basically saying, hey man, like, God says you're gonna win. So you have this religious zeal coming up from the east in weird ways. The second religiousness is really shaking these people. He has a dream where someone who's like Pallas Athena, where there's a goddess in armor who hands, it's probably Athena because she's handing thunderbolts to him, like the weapons are here. Here are my father's great weapons. And she names the enemies of Sulla. And a woman says, you will kill him. You will kill him. You will kill him. You will kill him. And it's a woman saying it. We have unsettling echoes of this in Ukraine right now. I think this is a consistent human thing. There are times, despite what a lot of people say, there are definitely times when women, and especially women in leadership, and women generally, will support war. And when they do, it's extremely intense, obviously. There's been a resurgence in the popular media coming out of Ukraine itself of warrior goddess figures. The same nerves, the same neural pathways, the same hormonal agitation is happening in humans now, and it gets dark when you don't deal with it. There was a real-life woman, not a dream woman, a real-life woman from Syria that Sulla had around with him in the camp. She wore purple. She wore purple. And she also carried a spear. It's unsaid in the text, but it's implied. The spear is what Roman ambassadors would carry, and they would throw the spear ceremonially over the wall or into the camp or into the territory, whatever. That's how the Romans declared war, is they would just throw a spear that never hit anybody, and that was their symbolic way of saying, okay, you're going to get it. This woman was holding the spear. And she would always give advice. And then that's the question of, does he believe in it, or is it just cynical? And then when Sulla, there's a bit further on, when Sulla goes into Rome, that in case anyone would prophesy against him, he literally ties up the augur, the guy who's supposed to look at the auspices or the astrologer or whoever he was. He literally ties the guy up so that, no, it's only my religion. No, it's only my dreams. It's only my passionate feeling of divine people telling me to kill someone. With all of that happening. So where this ends, but not the story, where these chapters end is, the like success attended his lieutenants, Pompey, Crassus, Metellus, Servilius, who, with little or no loss, cut off vast numbers of the enemy, insomuch that Carbo, the prime supporter of the cause, fled by night, sailed over into Libya, Africa, where Gaius Marius also was. These are young men, young ambitious men. Pompey gets the nickname the adolescent butcher, haranguing old senators in something that would make you think of a Maoist struggle session, or like a Twitter mob, shouting, making an old senator kneel before him, shouting and screaming at him, walking around because he's in charge now, the young kid, Pompey, who comes with his daddy's legions. He had 2 legions who had been under the command of his father that he basically inherited when his father died, coming to ride to the aid of Sulla. Crassus, similar. Crassus was a little bit older. And there we are. At the time, this is the time at the end of this when the proscriptions begin, when the purges begin, when the exiles begin, when Sulla gives his lists of who is to be killed. One of them was a young, probably between 15 and 17-year-old boy, and you guys know where I'm going with this maybe. And he said, we need to kill him. His aunt was married to Gaius Marius. And they say, no, he's just a kid. Kill Gaius Julius? Gaius Julius Caesar? He's 15. Sulla said, fine. Let him go. But remember, in that youth goes many a Marius. And so I've often wondered, I wrote an article where I kind of paraphrased that quote, of what young woman, probably, politician would say, don't ban her from Twitter, but beware. In that girl goes many a Trump. Something to think about. Something to unsettle our stomachs as we grapple with the issues of the day and yesterday. Hope this file will fit onto the server. Thank you guys so much for indulging this longer session. There was a lot to cover. I'm going to look forward to talking with you soon. Thank you.